to Creature Kind Live Daily News. For those of you that don't know, my name is Ethan. Today we're going to be going over what's going on with certain mule deer, tiger, and grizzly bear populations. So we are streaming on both Rumble, YouTube, and Kick. Oh, by the way, we're gonna start. Okay, so from buckreel.com, mule deer 665 completes 173-mile migration, or I'm guessing this is somewhere around 300 square kilometer, not 300 square kilometers, 300 kilometer long migration. So I'm guessing this is probably from like the Red Desert over in southern South Central Wyoming and to some part of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, like the southern region. Oh, so there's a doe and her fawn. I wonder if doe is the specific mule deer that's being tracked. So this was back in August 2024. So on Wednesday, July 2nd, the University of Wyoming's Deer Migration Initiative shared up to date migration data, revealing that mule deer 665 arrived on her Teton Pass summer range after migrating 173 miles this spring. According to the Wyoming Migration Initiative, deer 665's journey began on her winter grounds in the Red Desert, culminating near Teton Pass. Deer 665, who recently turned 4 years old, migrated for 35 days within 18 days of travel and 17 days in stopover sites. So this seems to be a younger doe. Also, what's interesting is that she doesn't, or it doesn't sound like she's really staying with any herds, which is a bit surprising. So the Wyoming Migration Initiative tracking data on June 14th and 15th suggested that 665 gave birth to twin fawns, but visual sightings could not be confirmed, per the Wyoming Migration Initiative. Yep, mule deer over in western Wyoming do take the longest migrations, or um, they they intake the longest migrations of any population of mule deer within the United States. I mean, as well as North America in general. Wow. So she started right next to Superior, Wyoming, and then made it in the Red Desert all the way past Jackson on the way to Victor, Idaho. So she's definitely within the Grand Teton National Park at the end of her migration, at least during this part of the year. But, wow, that's quite something, and in a short period of time too. This last leg of migration from June 4th through 8th really shows Deer 665's determination to get back to her chosen summer range. Instead of staying in the remote Hoback Basin area where she was born in June of 2021 and where thousands of other deer spend the summer, she followed her usual pattern and pressed on to Jackson Hole.
She
Yeah,
just likes
she
to travel.
Yeah, she did this in less than 35 days. I mean, that's quite astounding. I mean, arriving in past Jackson Hole on June 8th. So the Wyoming Migration Initiative reported that on June 4th, 665 left Little Granite Creek in the Gros Ventre Mountains. And by June 5th, she had hoofed it 9 miles to Upper Game Creek. Later that evening, she descended a ridge south of Leaks Canyon and crossed the US 191 highway. Wow, she's definitely crossing a lot of obstacles, but this probably isn't too um, uncommon with many mule deer individuals. I mean, Wyoming in general has around, I believe, 200,000, 200 to 290,000 mule deer, which is a bit of a decrease from, I believe, the early 1990s, which had a massive record of 590,000 mule deer. At least that's the estimate. And there also seems to be around 37 or 38 different mule deer herds across Wyoming, which consists of, um, in some cases, over 10,000 individuals. So this 5-lane highway sees 10,000 vehicles a day moving at 55 miles per hour. So she's truly running a gauntlet. It's a reminder that every time we visit Jackson Hole or Grand Teton National Park, um, Jackson Hole is basically amongst or in Grand Teton National Park. The animals we see along the highways may have migrated dozens or more than 100 miles to reach that spot. Yeah, it's quite astounding, or a little over 160 kilometers. Another thing when it comes to the elk, that they will compete for food in some cases in these different areas. The elk tend to be more concentrated over in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, but you can still find elk herds throughout Wyoming. They aren't just situated there. I believe there's somewhere around 150,000 elk in all of Wyoming, also across 35 different herds. White-tailed deer, there doesn't really seem to be an estimate for their population, at least for all of Wyoming. But when it comes to herds, there also doesn't seem to be an estimate, just simply herd units. So the difference is a, for say, deer herd just refers to a specific group of deer, in this case, the white-tailed deer. And then a deer unit refers to the whole geographic area in which these animals inhabit year round. Considering white-tailed deer, they will make longer migrations than in the eastern United States, but they don't have anywhere as long of a migration route as deer such as elk, mule deer, and in some cases moose or reindeer or caribou. So GPS data indicates that Deer 665's journey continued through hayfields and a golf course subdivision before she swam the Snake River near Wilson. Oh yeah, the Snake River is definitely an obstacle. Many mule deer and even some elk, occasionally even moose, have to cross. Um, Also, when it comes to their feeding behavior, mule deer tend to be much more of a grazer compared to white-tailed deer. By June 7th, she was in the Bridger Teton National Forest. Oh, okay. So this is adjacent to the Grand Teton National Park, as well as even Yellowstone, Shoshone National Forest, Caribou Targhee National Forest, and climbing into the Teton Range above Mosquito Creek. Deer 665's last day of migration was a 4-mile jaunt over the Teton Range, taking her above 8,400 feet in elevation. I guess that's not too surprising for the area. That seems to be the average elevation in many areas. Let's see. I'd say Colorado, in a lot of instances, has much higher areas of elevation than Wyoming. You mean even northwestern Wyoming and the Bighorn National Forest in the north central part of the state. But Colorado is also much more mountainous, at least in the western half, compared to Wyoming in general. And there's a little bit of Black Hills, Rocky Mountains over in the eastern part of the state. Finally, on June 8th, Deer 665 settled into her summer range on a steep forested slope a few miles from the Wyoming/Idaho border. I'm guessing this is referring to the Bridger Teton National Forest, but Grand Teton National Park is also somewhat adjacent to the Idaho-Wyoming border. Over the course of 10 days, she stayed close to the highway, ranging between 400 feet and 1,400 feet from the road, according to GPS tracking.
Well, that's a huge difference.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I mean, it's not too far away, but I guess if there is enough dense cover, probably doesn't care too much. And depending on the time of year, there's probably not going to be very much traffic if this is a major road. If it's a summer, there's definitely going to be several traffic jams. Despite the car traffic and noise, Deer 665 knows that this summer range works for her because she's returned here for part or all of each summer since 2022. We can't be certain why Deer 665 traveled so far through other suitable habitats only to spend the summer next to the Teton Pass Highway. I'm guessing it's a busy highway. And this is the road that they were referring to before. It likely has to do with the availability of food, which is driven by precipitation. As long as there's great food to eat, she doesn't mind the traffic. Well, it's not just necessarily food. She also needs shelter. And even for her fawn, also, how are the carnivores in the area? Like, what's the predation intensity in the area? Does she have to deal with different packs of wolves? Or cougars more of an issue? Even coyotes? Grand Teton National Park, even grizzly bears can be a bit of an issue.
I think she uses
Black
the
bears too.
traffic to eliminate her competition or
Yeah,
her
it seems to be.
enemies.
Probably lures them over to the highway.
As a big RV comes by, splat.
Yeah. That's harsh, but I guess it benefits this deer. So the Wyoming Migration Initiative surmised that Deer 665 will work to put on body fat this summer while nursing her fawns. WMI will resume 655's migration tracking map updates when she starts migrating again this fall. I think it's supposed to be 665 again. I've not heard of, oh, that's it, this specific mule deer. So this is definitely a new one. It's it's a bit of a challenge keeping up with specific individuals. I think there are just so many now that you just kind of forget to check up on certain, I think, like animal individuals that are being studied, and they usually just have a specific number name. But what's another thing? Also, you have it where several will just perish. So it's like,
What happened to that cougar you used to follow in California?
oh, he died way back, um, like before 2019 or 2018. So let's see. Heading to another part of the world from mangabay.com. New DNA analysis reveals tigers feeding on more diverse prey. Let's see where this is occurring, considering there's quite a few different populations of tigers, especially in India, that have a wide range of different species of herbivores that they feed on. But maybe this is one of those instances where originally they were really sticking to just a couple species of prey animals, which is can be common for certain populations of carnivores. And then something occurs and they end up having a much more um, they end up switching to a larger variety in their diet. Usually it's because something occurred in the ecosystem and they just had to quickly adapt. This is the case with certain invasive species of Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean ants. Well, that they're native to different islands, but they were introduced to certain parts of Tanzania and Kenya, and they've had an impact on the different species of vegetation as well, specifically the acacia trees and the acacia ants in the area. And so this is having an effect on the feeding habits of giraffes, zebras, which the zebras in the area were really almost one of the only herbivores that the lions, specifically in these ecosystems, were feeding on. And they immediately switched to having a larger portion of their diet on focusing on water buffalo. So that's a major difference in food. Also, it seems like they were picking on other herbivores as well. So, understanding what large carnivores eat is critical for conservation. For tigers, which are apex predators and require large territories and abundant prey, even small changes in diet can have far reaching ecological or social consequences. So, something negative is going on. It's interesting when it came to lions and those ants, it was really like the native acacia ant, which thrives on the acacia trees, was having a big negative impact from that invasive ant. But I wonder if this is a similar thing going on with these tigers. Most studies so far have relied on scat analysis to understand tiger diets. The method involves washing scats, extracting undigested remains such as hair or bone fragments, and identifying prey species under a microscope. While widely used, this approach has important limitations. It can miss prey species with soft tissues, overlook rare prey, and misidentify species whose hair looks similar. Results can also vary depending on observer experience. That's so interesting. Washing the scats. I haven't heard of. Well, I guess if they're trying to identify specifically like the bits of undigested tissue as well as hair, then that can make sense. A new study from Ranthambore Tiger Reserve in Rajasthan now tests whether DNA metabarcoding, a molecular technique that extracts and identifies prey DNA directly from scat, can overcome these limitations and offer a clearer picture of what tigers are actually eating. So in Rajasthan, so we're in India, there are no elephants or Indian elephants specifically, or greater one horn rhinos in this region. And I believe when it comes to at least the greater one horn rhinos, it simply just isn't the right type of habitat for them. When it comes to the greater one horn rhinos, they really like to stick to a more floodland sort of an area, or grass floodland. And this just isn't that specific habitat. It's more brushy, or you could say more forest like, at least when it comes to an Indian forest. I'm not sure when it comes to the elephants whether or not they were there historically and they just haven't come back to this range, or it's completely cut off in some instances. So that's a bigger question. By directly comparing the two methods, we aim to assess differences in prey detection, diversity, and taxonomic resolution, identifying species accurately. Specifically, we wanted to understand whether metabarcoding could provide a more comprehensive and less biased picture of tiger diet, especially by detecting rare or overlooked prey, says Sarang Mashikar, wildlife biologist, National Center for Biological Sciences, and co-author of the study. Also, when it comes to specifically, I think Rajasthan, India as a whole, there's only around 125 tigers. So I'm not familiar with how many square miles or square kilometers Rajasthan is, but specifically, like how much available tiger habitat there also is, how many protected areas there are. But I am familiar with Ranthambore National Park. But what's going on here with the tigers is
Wait,
definitely
are they not
questionable.
allowed to kill tigers in India?
As self defense, no, you're not. Let's see. In fact, that goes for nearly every animal. So let's between December 2019 and February 2020, the researchers carried out field surveys across RTR, repeatedly sampling along the reserve's forest road network. Fresh scats were collected during 5 survey rounds covering more than 2,000 kilometers, or what, round what, 1,200, 1,300 miles? That's a lot. So they seem to be sambar deer. I think they're healthy. It's interesting because sambar deer, cheetah deer, they tend to be viewed, at least for those that are somewhat familiar with these species of deer over in South Asia, as just extremely abundant, like different Indian macaques or langur monkeys. But there's only around 50,000, somewhere around that number, sambar deer in all of India. And granted, the massive human population there, but it's also an area twice the size of Alaska. So it's not exactly a recommended population. It should be much higher. So let's see. And yeah, I think that's absolutely just immoral to not be able to defend yourself against any animal, or allowed to. So, because field identification of scats can be unreliable, genetic testing was used to confirm predator identity. Each confirmed tiger scat was then analyzed using both methods, traditional mechanical sorting and DNA metabarcoding, allowing the team to directly compare how much dietary information each approach could recover from the same samples. There were several challenges. Scat is a contamination prone environmental DNA sample and typically contains degraded prey DNA. To minimize contamination, this is really like anything that would interfere with that specific DNA. Only fresh scats were collected using sterile gloves, surgical masks, and tools. Yeah, that's what I would expect. Preservation was equally critical. All samples intended for analysis were individually labeled, stored with silica gel and Ziploc bags, and kept frozen at negative 21 degrees Celsius. I still don't know at the moment what that is in Fahrenheit. Sounds cold. Maintaining this cold chain during transport was critical to prevent the DNA from degrading. Yes, a woolly mammoth, a woolly rhino, cave lion would agree. Samples were transported on dry ice,
It's almost 70 degrees.
like below zero.
No, 70 degrees Fahrenheit.
No, no, negative 21 degrees Celsius.
Oh,
I was gonna say that's pretty sure ice or snow doesn't occur at that
okay,
temperature.
but I'm half listening while I'm trying to do everything.
Um, well, what is interesting is I think,
It's negative 5.8 degrees below zero.
oh, okay, that's cold. I mean, enough for, well, cold enough for the DNA. And yeah, frozen young mammoths would agree. No, it was probably colder when they froze to death. Anyway, so let's see. Samples were transported on dry ice to the laboratory and stored again at negative 21 degrees Celsius or negative 5 degrees Fahrenheit until DNA extraction, says Musumi Ghoshharar, academic dean, Nature Conservation Foundation, and co author of the study. I thought there was somebody else. Maybe there's several co authors. In the lab, each scat was um, homogenized using liquid nitrogen to ensure DNA could be extracted from all components, including hair and bone fragments. Researchers also used a blocking molecule to prevent tiger DNA from overwhelming the prey DNA during analysis. Okay. I'm glad that they're giving us, how it's a description on how it's being preserved, but I really wonder like what they discovered. So the difference between the two methods was striking. DNA metabarcoding detected far more prey species and nearly twice as many prey occurrences as mechanical sorting. On average, each scat contained 2 to 3 prey species when analyzed genetically, compared to just over one prey species using the traditional method. The genetic approach also detected rare prey that mechanical sorting completely missed, including rodents, birds, and even sloth bear. Whoa. Okay, I got to be honest. These are not prey animals that are often talked about when it comes to tiger feeding behavior in any part of India and even throughout different parts of Southeast Asia in general. I'm not going to include different parts of Russia and like central or northeastern China because they're preying on other species of animals, even though you could probably at least find is it sambar deer, another species that you can find in India. Maybe it's boar, but it's a different subspecies of boar. So what is it? Yeah, rodents, birds. So it's probably feeding on maybe even porcupines in the area, which are rodents, and completely different species of porcupine compared to what many are familiar with over in North America, certain parts of Europe and Africa. Let's see. Now the sloth bear, even though that is mentioned, it's still kind of rare when it comes to especially a constant source of food for a tiger. That's very interesting. Now it hasn't necessarily said that, but it's definitely in the scat. When it comes to the birds, I do wonder, maybe cranes. Mechanically sorting usually identifies a single prey species per scat, giving the impression that tigers feed on one prey item at a time. Metabarcoding revealed a much more complex picture. So, no prey species identified through mechanical sorting were missed by metabarcoding, highlighting the greater sensitivity of the genetic method. Most importantly, DNA analysis reshaped the picture of what tigers and Rantham boar are eating. Wild prey still forms a substantial component of the diet. Oh, are they preying on cows too, or goats? Cheetah and sambar, both large deer species, remain key food sources alongside nilgai. Okay, this would make sense. Yeah, this type of forested habitat, or it's more of like a wet season, dry season forest. You're going to have the largest antelope species in this area. So, nilgai antelope can reach over 800 pounds or a little over 350 kilograms. They're also quite invasive in Texas as well. I believe they're over like several thousand. Wild pig and chinkara. I'm guessing it's referring to the not Eurasian, Indian wild boar. Chinkara, that's not hitting me what that is. I think that might be a species of rodent. Let's look up what on earth this is. Chinkara. It's probably related to the capybara. So Chinkara. Or maybe even certain lagomorphs over in South America. Not necessarily looking like a viscacha. Oh, whoops. Okay. That was completely off. And I had left out the different species of antelope over in India. Some which can look somewhat similar to antelope over in Africa, considering they are very closely related. This is a very Thompson's gazelle sort of a look. There's also certain antelope species over in the Middle East that have a very similar morphology or physiology, but they usually don't reach much more than 30 to 35 pounds. They're very small, or a little over 15 kilograms.
Say cheese.
Yeah, this guy. He looks pretty robust. Pretty sure it's a male. Yeah, it's a male.
Well, if he's not a male, something else is hanging there.
Um, yeah, I think they're a bit bigger than the Middle Eastern species that I'm thinking of. Probably weighing somewhere around 50 to 60 pounds or a little over 25 kilograms. So, however, domestic livestock emerged as a major component. Cattle were detected in over three quarters of all tiger scats. Well, that's not necessarily good to hear. Um, yeah, geez. And contributed the single largest share of dietary biomass. When combined with buffalo, I'm guessing these are domestic water buffalo. You don't really have any wild buffalo over in India. You do have certain areas of Southeast Asia, and then of course there's that little population over in Hong Kong, which always seems to be just hanging out on the beach.
Oh, I forgot about that. Didn't you do an article on that one?
Yeah, they were just yeah, they're hanging on this massive green area, and I think people can just walk amongst them. Let's see. So, while okay, when combined with buffalo, domestic animals made up nearly 40% of the total prey biomass consumed by tigers. Yeah, it's immense. While mechanical sorting suggested sambar as the most frequently consumed prey, that's actually what I was going to assume is that sambar or cheetah deer were going to be the larger percentage of or largest percentage of any species of prey animal that these tigers are feeding on. And would probably be, I would assume, for most tigers in India, if you're excluding domestic animals. DNA analysis identified domestic cattle as the most common dietary component, followed by cheetah and sambar. Yeah, okay, well, we've got the cattle in this situation.
Well, at least they have a buffet.
Yeah, a major buffet. Very nice. This really is the golden corral for these tigers. To reduce the risk of bias, the researchers also used negative controls at every stage of laboratory analysis and checked whether detected prey matched what is known from the local ecosystem. This was especially important for interpreting detections of domestic species and rare prey, ensuring that our results reflected ecologically plausible tiger diets.
I don't know why that just sounds funny.
Yeah, it does. Like almost yeah, they're eating cows, so that's good. Like, it's partially I'm glad that they have a full stomach and they're able to reproduce, but at the same time, I am concerned about,
Well,
the
most people in
people with
India don't eat cow.
well, that's the thing. I'm always confused with what they use the cows. Oh, their horns actually are of use. But anyway, besides that, the findings do not suggest the tigers have stopped hunting wild prey. Instead, they point to a growing reliance on livestock alongside natural prey, a pattern with serious implications for human tiger conflict. Ranthambore is a relatively small, largely linear reserve surrounded by villages and agricultural land. That seems to be the case for most um, national parks in India. Tigers frequently move beyond park boundaries. This is not surprising for most carnivores in different protected areas around the world. While free grazing cattle are also commonly found inside the forest. Yeah, that's another thing about India that I was going to mention is that the cattle, it's really like sometimes you don't even feel bad, unlike like different areas of North America, Europe, maybe Japan, or oh, Australia. Um, when you hear about, cattle, getting consumed by carnivores or even South Africa, the major, dairy industry there, is that here they're just allowed to freely roam. And it's like many cases they're not even contained in a certain area. So it's like you really don't even care. It's like, okay, well, how much beef is this guy feeding on? Um Let's see. So tigers. Oh, the study found that scats containing livestock were distributed across the reserve rather than being confined to its edges. The authors caution, however, that scat locations do not necessarily reflect kill sites, given the park's linear configuration. Many tigers likely range into peripheral areas where livestock depredation occurs. Maybe, but I think also they just come into like the cows just come into the national park. And the problem is with the number of cows, I'm concerned about overgrazing from the cows. So there comes to a point where I'm just going to say, you know what? I hope the tiger eats them. Livestock depredation is already the most common form of human tiger conflict in the Rantham Boar landscape. Increased dependence on cattle could further escalate conflict, retaliation, and pressure on an already isolated tiger population. I don't think it would. I don't really hear any issues when it comes to losing cows over in India. Um,
What are they gonna
that's
complain
a
about, that they're losing their food source?
yeah. I don't really understand it.
Now, if it was eating all the chickens,
Yeah, that might be an issue. That's probably more of like a not a leopard. Well, I mean, it would be more of a leopard problem, but maybe certain civets in the area. So this tiger seems to have taken upon a water buffalo calf. That seems like a very healthy tiger too. I think it's a female. So though the findings show that DNA metabarcoding improves prey detection, some uncertainties remain. While the method reliably shows whether a prey species is present, it cannot accurately estimate how much of each prey was consumed. Key behavioral questions also remained resolved. Because tiger DNA was deliberately suppressed, rare events such as cannibalism or scavenging are unlikely to be detected. Um, Scavenging. I don't know how you would. I mean, maybe you could, but I'm not sure exactly how you would be able to distinguish whether a predator was scavenging or not. Now, the cannibalism, yeah, you figure out that um, well, even if there were certain hairs in the scat from another tiger, it could simply be that that specific tiger engulfed the hair of another tiger that was feeding on the carcass, but didn't kill and eat that tiger. Not that that isn't impossible; it has occurred, and yeah, tigers will cannibalize, but that doesn't always necessarily mean that it did feed on that another tiger. But anyway, and while livestock consumption is clearly high, its drivers are uncertain. I think it's because they're just there and the cows don't do anything. There's the occasional cow that might try to defend itself, but usually the tiger just takes it down. It's literally a pushover. It's especially the breeds that are usually raised in India. It remains unclear whether the observed livestock consumption reflects a short-term opportunistic response or a more persistent shift in prey use. It's also not new that they're feeding on cows. The findings highlight the need to update how tiger diets are studied, particularly in human dominated landscapes. For Rantham boar and similar reserves, the study underscores the urgency of strengthening conflict mitigation beyond protected area boundaries. This includes timely and adequate compensation for livestock losses, improved livestock guarding practices, and the potential use of insurance schemes to offset risk. Equally important is adopting participatory approaches that actively involve local communities. I'm guessing that means fencing in the cows. The ability to analyze an ecologically relevant trait like diet reiterates that DNA based approaches are powerful tools for studying endangered species. Nimble, strategic application of such approaches is critical as overlap between humans, livestock, and wildlife continues to increase. I really don't think there's anywhere else in India for that, for people and animals to be, amongst each other. I think it's already at the limit. Let's see. Anyway, let's head over to another part of the world. So, from WyomingNews.com. So, we are back, and I'm guessing the Rocky Mountains. Yellowstone grizzly range contracts by 4%, while northern continental divide bears gain 12% more ground. Well, this is very captivating. So apparently, the grizzly bears over in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem have shrunk in their home range or their overall home range. And the ones over in, so this is in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem consists of different parts of southern or specifically southwestern Montana, southeastern Idaho, and northwestern Wyoming, with the majority of the ecosystem being situated within northwestern Wyoming, including Yellowstone National Park, the Grand Teton National Park. The northern continental divide ecosystem is over in somewhat northwestern Montana, and it's larger. The northern continental divide ecosystem is somewhere around 33,000 square miles, or pushing somewhere around 53,000 square kilometers. And the greater Yellowstone ecosystem is somewhere around 21,000 square miles, or pushing around 35,000 square kilometers. So the greater Yellowstone ecosystem's grizzly population continues to stagnate geographically, a relatively new trend that wildlife managers say is related to bears saturating suitable habitat where the species is tolerated. I guess that means they're just um, like it's sort of imminent domain from other maybe black bears in the area. Let's see. So that finding is described in a new and first ever range wide report summarizing where grizzly bears are found in lower 48. That's funny. Overall, grizzlies, which are classified as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, continue their decades long recovery and reoccupied 4% more over the past 2 years. Oh, for some reason, maybe I misinterpreted that word and I thought it meant that they retracted. Maybe that's the word I was thinking of. So that equates to a range wide expansion of roughly 2,250 square miles, or an area about two-thirds the size of Yellowstone National Park. Well, that's pretty decent considering compared to the rest of North America, it's quite a small bear population. Leaving out populations like Idaho, which, especially in the Cabinet Yak ecosystem or the Selkirk Root ecosystem, there's only around 90 to 110 bears, grizzly bears specifically. Yet those specific individuals are always traveling throughout different parts of Idaho, and they're not just situated in that specific area. Almost like the different forests in Idaho, they're just too dense and they don't have enough forage for these bears. Then again, you have these large mule deer herds. I mean, over in I think Montana, you've got somewhere around 300 to 350,000 mule deer, about 180,000 elk, and over in Idaho, I think you have around 130,000 elk in the state. So where was I? Okay, but Bruins that dwell, this is another word for the bears, that dwell in the tri-state Yellowstone area were the exception. The estimated 1,050 grizzlies there occupied about 3.5% less ground, or about 963 fewer square miles. Wait a second. It mentioned the 4% more habitat up here. I'm confused. So let's see, or about 963 fewer square miles than they did 2 years ago. The report does not address what drove the change, but lead author and Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks research biologist um, Cecily Costello said it's likely related to grizzlies running out of ideal habitat in the modern West. Well, trying to figure out what to say about this. It's hard to say. I mean, I'm not exactly sure where it's pointing to in the situation. I'm guessing different areas of southwestern Montana, maybe southeastern Idaho, because I think one of the major things is when it comes to a large portion of Montana and Wyoming and even southern Idaho, it's just sagebrush plains. And there really isn't any forest. There's like scattered bits of forest here and there, but that's about it. And I'm not even sure if I would call it a forest. There's just little stands of trees. And no, they weren't planted by people. Like not it's just specific pine trees in certain areas. Now, technically the grizzly bears would have historically have inhabited these areas, but the populations would be much more scattered and the individuals would have much larger territories compared to ones in the forested regions. It's just much harder to gain access to the right amount of food. Let's see. When you look at the habitat to the east of the Yellowstone ecosystem, to the south of Yellowstone, you're looking at a lot of open prairie, kind of like what I was saying with sagebrush steppe. There's not really big river valleys these bears can move into. There's a little bit of limitation in terms of the range expansion in those directions. Wyoming grizzly managers see it similarly, attributing the slight retreat to bears losing spaces where they can live without getting into trouble. I mean, in this instance, you can say they're coming to contact with a lot of different cattle ranches, but I would say there's still technically habitat for them. I think it's just indicative of where the population is, said Dan Thompson, large carnivore supervisor for the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. I don't think we should expect it to expand. Maybe you have it where the grizzly bears don't seem to be or have a lot of preference for the steppe or the sagebrush prairie, which does make sense. But there are incidents where grizzly bears are being seen much more often, at least over Montana, in different areas of the central and eastern part of the state, like different individuals just simply wandering from the northern continental divide ecosystem. Matt Gold, the interagency grizzly bear studies team's new leader, agreed. His predecessor, Frank Van Manen, predicted about a decade ago that the grizzly population in the Yellowstone region would soon stabilize. And now it seems to be doing just that. Occupied range is kind of waned up, and now it's kind of slightly decreasing. It'll be interesting to see, does it drastically drop, or is it going to stay ready and bounce around? I mean, let's say they don't want to head back to the prairie. I think it's very possible you will start seeing, or we will start seeing grizzly bears marching down into different parts of northern Utah. But then again, it's like, are the people willing to coexist with them? Because that's a big issue, or it's a big question. And as well as different parts of northern Idaho. So basically north of Boise. North of Boise, you have like the Sawtooth National Forest, the Salmon National Forest. So yeah, these are all big questions, but at least over in Montana, though it's just mentioning east. I mean, if it's referring to the whole Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, that would also be referencing central Montana as well. So biologists first documented the end of a half century long era of grizzly range expansion in the Yellowstone area 2 years ago. Sheesh. It always seemed like it just kept expanding. At the time, federal scientists observed a 0.5% reduction in the species' overall distribution, a retreat of 142 square miles. I mean, that is something. The mapping Costello and her co-authors just completed examined the period from 2010 to 2024. Distribution in the Yellowstone and Northern Continental Divide ecosystem is based on hard data from tracked bears, conflicts, and other verified observations over a 15-year rolling window. Data is smoothed out based on the whereabouts of all grizzlies known to exist in any given area. For that reason, bears that make outlier movements, like the subadult male that reached the bighorns in 2024. Oh yeah, I remember about that. Um, guess I'll have to check on that guy. Don't usually influence the distribution maps. Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's like, no, you don't count. You just went on a homeward bound adventure. Contraction in the Yellowstone ecosystem's occupied range comes at a time where or when there has been a record number of bears dying. Though grizzly biologists say they don't necessarily see the two trends as being related. That is interesting. Um yeah, there was that big die off I think in 2025 like last year where like 76 grizzly bears died in Yellowstone. So it was kind of odd or maybe it was between 2024 and 2025, but yeah, there's a big question as to why. Now, cub mortality is not necessarily surprising, but that's still quite a decrease. Mortality hit a high in 2024 with 72 known grizzlies that died that calendar year. The death toll this year is almost the same at 71, which is about 35% greater than the 10-year average of 54 mortalities. Oh, I didn't realize there was that average of mortality. Jeez. Um okay, so this was from the end of last year. Still though. So the data is smoothed out based on the whereabouts of all grizzlies. Wait a second, did I skip something? Oh no. The leading causes of death according to Good or Gold were livestock conflict. 21 grizzlies killed as a result, followed by site conflicts with humans, 16 grizzlies, self-defense killings, 12 grizzlies, accidental deaths, 9 grizzlies, and natural causes like predation, 6 grizzlies. Just kind of stick it all into natural causes, but that's classified as its own thing.
Well, I would say if you attack someone and they shoot you, it's a natural cause.
Um, yeah, I think it's maybe it's because it just sounds more interesting if something like a pack of wolves or another brown bear is involved. A maybe a snake bite.
Yeah, I would think poaching wouldn't be natural causes, but
Let's see. This year, 3 and 4 Yellowstone area grizzly deaths were within a zone in the core of the ecosystem known as the demographic monitoring area. That's a slightly higher rate than average. Wildlife managers count bears in demographic monitoring area. This area was declared fully occupied by bears in 2019. In Costello's distribution report, this core area represented 71% of where grizzlies were found in 2024. The other 29% of the occupied range fell outside of this core area on the fringes of the mountainous public land dominated ecosystem. This is where grizzly range has been retreating. When Yellowstone ecosystem grizzly distribution reached its peak in 2021, more than 40% of occupied range was mapped outside the core zone. Yeah, I guess it's not too surprising, but I guess it's not hitting me where specifically this is occurring within the ecosystem. Last year, the largest contraction in occupied Yellowstone habitat was located in eastern Idaho, in the Big Hole Mountains and Snake River Range. Yeah, the Snake River does cut through a major part of Idaho, especially in the southern part of the state. Another recession appears in Montana's Ruby Range. Maps from the report show, and there's a small loss of occupied range in the South Pass area off the tip of the Wyoming River Range. Yeah, the Wyoming River Range, it's this area of the Rocky Mountains that kind of points southeast from the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. It is a part of it, but it's also where the mule deer herds pass through as well, at least in the lower valleys. There's some elk herds in there too. Costello, who compiled the maps, said she doesn't put a whole lot of stock into small regional changes. I am somewhat surprised they haven't mentioned the wolves, but maybe they just don't really have anything to do with the bears in this case. The edges are a little bit uncertain because you have less grizzly data about the edges than you do about the middle. The other major population of grizzly bears in the lower 48 dwell in Montana's northern continental divide ecosystem. Occupied grizzly range stretched by 2,500 square miles, a nearly 12% increase. These bears mostly pressed into new habitat on the eastern and southern sides of the ecosystem, gaining ground in the Sapphire Range and Boulder and Big Belt Mountains. Map show. The northern continental divide ecosystem's occupied range encompasses much more open prairie than to the south in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Yeah, it makes sense for, especially as you travel further south from the northern continental divide ecosystem and even further east. It's really just prairie. There are certain river gorges or cuts in the landscape, but they tend to simply host more just like riverside or creekside trees in these different riparian habitats, not really like the spruce Rocky Mountain ecosystems. Partly that's explained by Montana grizzlies moving down big river corridors. When a bunch of them make the movement, the occupied range line can pull out really quickly. Smoothing of the data can then make it look like they've reoccupied big chunks of open country. Habitat is another explanation for why western Montana occupied grizzly range keeps stretching while Yellowstone area bears have held steady and retreated in places. I will say that that tends to be a much more um, common scenario or typical scenario is that Montana grizzlies tend to move a lot more, and Wyoming brown bears at least not so much. Though it seems to be a bit more um, consistent with bears in the southern part of the ecosystem, at least traveling towards certain individuals just heading towards the Utah border. When you look at the plant communities and mountains that exist in western Montana, there are still a lot of what could be considered decent bear habitat. It's the expectation that we'll probably continue to see bears moving into those habitats. It's probably referring to those little bits of the Middle Rocky Mountain ecosystem that are somewhat separated from each other. And you could have smaller populations of bears still have access to genetics in both the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem and the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, but there's just smaller bits of habitat in that specific region. A lot of that growth is expected to take grizzly populations toward Idaho's Bitterroot ecosystem. This is where I would expect the bears to be, and for some reason, they're moving at such a slow pace towards that area, which is why I'm wondering, is it just not preferable habitat or is something else in their way? Which has been unoccupied since the species was wiped out there in the 1950s.
Or maybe they just don't wanna go back.
I mean, it seems like that. It really, like, hasn't changed for, at least a couple of decades when it comes to just their overall population in Idaho. I mean, a slight increase, but not very much. Don't even think we have evidence of a major, like, any reproduction occurring in Idaho when it comes to grizzly bear cubs or grizzly bears in general. It's interesting to see. There's a lot more I'd like to get out of what's occurring within these areas. Um, but it's good to see. Same thing with the impressive mule deer migration, at least by that specific doe and possibly even her fawn. But in the picture, those were probably just separate individuals, and it's always funny hearing about the tigers taking out the cows over in India, but hopefully they keep up their venison or their sambar deer diet. Though it seems to be they're also feeding on different species of rodents. I'm guessing it's like the Indian porcupine, and they're taking out sloth bears and probably different species of wetland birds too. Oh, they're feeding on peacocks, and since they're an abundant food source in that region. So, thanks for joining. And from Prehistoric to Presence, my name is Ethan. This is Creature Guide Live Daily News. We are streaming on both Rumble, YouTube, and Kick. And remember that nothing is better than